In this video, we can see about the blood clotting factors. Generally, there are 13 blood factors are present, but sixth factor is absent. Generally, the blood is rightly called as the river of life. Blood is called as the liquid connective tissue. It shows 55% of plasma and 45% of red blood cells. The blood cells are of three types: RBC, WBC, and platelets. It is slightly alkaline, that is 7.4 pH. It shows that blood is responsible for the transportation of oxygen from the lungs to the various parts of the body, transportation of food material, transportation of excretory material from the body to the various parts of the body. It is also the cells are responsible to produce the antibodies, which against has the protection. In 1954, the International Commission on Blood Coagulation postulated 13 blood factors. They are factor 1. Factor 1 is called as fibrinogen, factor 2 is called prothrombin, factor 3 is called the tissue thromboplastin, factor 4 is called calcium ions. Calcium ions are very vital for coagulation of blood. Factor 5, that is labile factor. Factor 6 is the hypothetical factor. That factor is absent. Factor 7, stable factor. Factor 8, that is anti-hemophilic factor. Factor 9, Christmas factor or plasma thromboplastin component. Factor 10, Stewart Prover factor. Factor 11, plasma thromboplastin antecedent. Factor 12, Hasman factor. Factor 13, fibrin stabilizing factor. Here you can see the blood clotting factors. I have developed a simple mnemonic. With the help of this mnemonic, you can remember these blood factors even in your sleeping. That is, you can see the fine people think calcium and labile factors, whereas stable anti-hemophilic Christians start PTA and HF. Here you can see fine people think calcium and labile factor, whereas stable and anti-hemophilic Christians start PTA and HF. Fine means here the fibrinogen, P means prothrombin, T means thromboplastin, calcium, and labile factor. Sixth factor is axalerin. Seventh factor is stable factor. Eighth factor is anti-hemophilic factor. Ninth factor is the Christmas factor. 10th factor is the Stewart Prover factor. 11th factor is the plasma thromboplastin antecedent, and the 12th factor is Hasman factor, and the 13th factor is the fibrin stabilizing factor. Here you can see the mnemonic very interestingly. Fine means fibrinogen. This is the first factor. Second factor is the people, that means prothrombin. Third factor is the think, that means pro thromboplastin. The fourth factor is the calcium factor. Fifth factor is the labile factor. The sixth factor is absent, that is called as axalerin. It is a hypothetical factor. This factor is denied now. The seventh factor, that is stable factor. Here you can see the eighth factor. Eighth factor is anti-hemophilic factor or anti-hemophilic globulin. The ninth factor is the Christian factor. That is, Christian means is here the Christmas factor. The 10th factor, that is Stewart Prover factor, as well as the 11th factor, plasma thromboplastin antecedent. 12th factor, Hasman or surface factor. The 13th factor is the fibrin stabilizing factor. Once again, I am telling, that is fibrinogen, first factor. Second factor is the prothrombin. Third factor is thromboplastin. Fourth factor is the calcium factor. Fifth factor is stable factor, labile factor. Sixth factor is the hypothetical factor, that is axelerin. Seventh factor is stable factor, that is the eighth factor is anti-hemophilic factor as anti-hemophilic globulin. Ninth factor is the Christmas factor. Tenth factor is the Stewart-Prower factor. 11th factor is the plasma thromboplastin antecedent. The 12th factor is the Hezman or surface factor. The 13th factor is fibrin stabilizing factor. Here you can see the different factors one by one. The first and foremost factor is the fibrinogen or the first factor. It is a soluble protein found dissolved in plasma. Its plasma concentration is about 300 mg per deciliter. Deciliter means 100 ml. Its molecular weight is about 3,40,000. Here the fibrinogen is converted into fibrin by the action of the enzyme thrombin. Fibrinogen is a soluble fluid-like material. It's converted into the insoluble fibrin clot by the action of the thrombin. This is the first factor. Now you can see the second factor, that is the prothrombin. It is an inactive form of thrombin. Here, with the help of thromboplastin or thrombokinase and calcium ions, it is converted into thrombin during the action of blood clotting. Its concentration is about 15 mg per deciliter per 100 ml, and its molecular weight is about 72,500. This is the second factor. The third factor is tissue thromboplastin or factor 3. This is also known as thrombokinase. It is obtained from brain, muscle and lungs. Its molecular weight is about 43,000. The fifth factor is the calcium factor. The calcium ions are vital for blood coagulation. Its concentration is about 0.5 mg per deciliter. Generally, half of the calcium in the blood is always in ionized state. The sixth factor, that is fifth factor, proaxelerin factor or Leville factor, it is present in traces in plasma, but it plays a vital role, a significant role in activation of prothrombin and release of thromboplastin from blood platelets. Factor sixth, that is axelerin, its existence is denied at present. That is seventh factor. You can see the seventh factor is also known as stable factor. It is a plasma factor. Its concentration in plasma is about 0.05 mg per deciliter. It plays a significant role in conversion of prothrombin to thrombin during coagulation. Generally, the eighth factor is also known as anti-hemophilic factor or anti-hemophilic globulin. It is present only in plasma, but it is absent in serum. Its concentration in plasma is about 1.6 mg per deciliter. Its molecular weight is about 1 to 2 into 10 to the power of 6. Its deficiency leads to hemophilia in males, and it is transmitted through the sex-linked recessive disorder. It is vital for extrinsic thromboplastin production and intrinsic prothrombin conversion. Generally, the deficiency of this factor will lead to disorder called hemophilia. Hemophilia means it is a bleeding disease, a royal blood disease. The factor 9, this is also known as Christmas factor. It is a globulin. It is helpful in the formation of tissue thromboplastin. It is activated by factor factor 11, that is PTA, plasma thromboplastin antecedent. Its deficiency leads to hemophilia C. Next one is the factor 10, Stewart factor, a Stewart-Prowan factor. This factor was introduced in 1959. It can activate prothrombin into thrombin. It is activated by factor 9, its concentration in plasma is about 1.5 mg per deciliter. Its molecular weight is about the 59,000. Here you can see the one more factor, that is factor 11. The factor 11 is also called as plasma thromboplastin antecedent or factor 11. It is inactive in plasma but activated by Hessman factor. It can activate Stewart factor during coagulation. Its concentration is about 0.6 mg per deciliter. The 12th factor can activate the 11th factor. The 11th factor can activate the 9th factor. There is a cascade of events will takes place in blood coagulation. The 12th factor is Hessman factor or surface factor. The plasma concentration of this factor is 2.9 mg per deciliter. Its molecular weight is about 76,000. This is a protein in nature, and the inactive form is activated by surface contact on surface contact. This is also known as clot promoting factor. Clot promoting factor. Here, the last factor is the 13th factor. That is, 13th factor is called fibrin stabilizing factor. This factor, along with calcium ions, that is fourth factor, convert the soft fibrin into clot into a solid fibrous fibrin. The plasma concentration of this factor is 2.0 mg per deciliter. Its molecular weight is about 3,20,000. Here you can see the whenever there is an injury or whenever there is an accident, the blood vessels gets ruptured. Within the 3 to 10 minutes, 9 minutes, the blood will 8 minutes. The blood will be coagulated. The coagulation or the blood clotting will takes place in a intrinsic will takes place in two ways. That is intrinsic pathway as well as extrinsic pathway. In intrinsic pathway, the 12th factor will be activated. This 12th factor will activate the 11th factor. The 11th factor will activate the 9th factor. 9th factor will activate the 8th factor. This 8th factor will activate the 10th factor. This is a common pathway. This 10th factor can activate the second factor, that is thrombin. This thrombin will converts into the prothrombin is converted into thrombin by the action of the thromboplastin. The thrombin is converted into fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is a soluble globular protein. It converts into fibrin, the insoluble protein. Fibrin clot or mesh is formed. That is 13th factor is formed. In the intrinsic pathway, the tissue factor will be released. This tissue factor can activate the 7th factor. This can activate the 10th factor. This, with the help of the 10th factor, this factor will convert the prothrombin into thrombin by means of the 5th factor, that is labile factor, 4th factor calcium factor, as well as phospholipids. It convert the prothrombin into thrombin, as well as the thrombin convert the fibrinogen into fibrin clot. This is the gist about the blood clotting. Thank you one and all for viewing this video. Thank you one and all. Please subscribe and give more chance to make more videos.